Heavenly Father, today we put on the full armor to protect us against attack. We put on the belt of truth to protect against lies and deception. We put on the breastplate of righteousness to protect our hearts from the temptations. We put the gospel of peace on our feet to walk in your light, peace, and freedom with the Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word, that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm honored to introduce you all to satanic ritual abuse, sexual abuse, and religious abuse survivor, artist and acrylic painter, sunset lover, color connoisseur, mental and spiritual health warrior, content creator, and host of her own podcast called She Got Away on YouTube, and someone I'm honored to call my new friend, Kibbi Linga. I met Kibbi on TikTok, where we made a divine connection through our combined audiences who introduced us, and I immediately knew she was someone whose testimony and work would have a tremendous impact on all of you. And I can't wait for those of you who are new here to meet her, and for those of you who already follow her to get to learn more about her. Kibbi was born into a satanic cult that she believes was multi-generational, and her abuse started at birth. The cult was headed by her mother, who was a high priestess and was also Kibbi's main abuser. Her family hid behind the cover of Catholicism and would use inversions of religion as an excuse to perpetuate abuse. Kibbi and her siblings, in turn, would experience religious abuse in addition to the horrors of SRA and SA. Kibbi's mother would lead the rituals, and her father would be in charge of cleanup after the rituals, as well as finding the children and babies her mother would use. Some of Kibbi's first memories involve seeing the world through LSD and feeding her baby doll's quote-unquote potion, which she now knows was a conditioning method to train her to drug her future children and pass on the generational trauma. Kibbi would be put in cages, be forced to watch and partake in human sacrifice, and would have to navigate dealing with a narcissistic mother. Kibbi told herself as a child that she would one day get away, be an artist, and expose her mother. And after years of being silenced, that is exactly what she is doing today. Kibbi has a loyal and supportive following on her social media platforms, including on Instagram and TikTok, and she just recently dove into the world of podcasting, where she started a channel on YouTube called She Got Away. Kibbi uses her platforms to create content to help educate listeners on things such as SRA and SA, dissociation and DID, coping and healing from extreme trauma, explaining how criminal activities intersect with unspeakable acts of sexual abuse, and so much more. Kibbi has a passion for igniting conversations crucial for awareness and understanding of these very real abuses that society looks away from, and she uses her voice to help her own healing, to give a voice to trafficked children, to spread awareness, and to help other survivors. Kibbi's mother and her abusers tried to break her, but what they didn't realize was that one day the little girl who was being severely abused would break her silence in the generational trauma. Kibbi also has an incredible art collection she showcases on social media and on her website, www.kibbilinga.com, and I'll have all her links in the show notes for you guys to connect with her. Kibbi inspires me in so many ways, and I'm absolutely honored to have her on the show today. I ask you all that you put away whatever you're doing and give this brave warrior your full attention as we listen to both her story and all the ways she's turned her pain into purpose. Before I finish introducing today's guest, I wanted to give just a couple quick reminders and updates. If you'd like to be on the podcast as a guest, share any information privately with me, or submit a written testimony to be published in my upcoming book series or as an article on my Substack, you can email me at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com. I'm also proud to announce my new partnership with one of my favorite brands, Rife Technologies, which is a new and innovative company dedicated to revolutionizing the health tech industry. The real Rife machine is an electromagnetic radio frequency device engineered by scientist Dr. Royal Raymond Rife in the 1920s, used to address various health concerns. These technologies have been used and referenced by so many guests on this podcast, and I'm excited to announce that you can now gift yourselves with 15% off your Rife Technologies order with the discount link and code I've posted in the show notes. All the rest of my links are in the show notes as well, and I'd love your support across all platforms. Thank you all for caring so deeply about survivors and whistleblowers, and for helping to make the imagination the safest space on the internet for survivor and whistleblower disclosures. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming today's guest of honor, walking miracle, voice for the voiceless, anti-child trafficking and survivor advocate, podcaster, TikToker, survivor and overcomer, and a woman on a mission to continue to live up to the promises she made to herself as a child to make the world a better and safer place for all children. The one, the only, Kibbi Linga. Kibbi, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you so much for having me and for the warm welcome. I so feel it. And once meeting you, like building up to meeting you, a lot of people were recommending to me to meet you. And once I met you, I also felt a huge rush of inspiration, and I still do, from the community you've built and for your advocacy. So thank you. Thank you so much.
And thank you. It's really cool to see somebody else doing it, especially a survivor. Like, people thank me for doing it. And I'm like, you guys, this is just what we should be doing. Like, you on the other side of the screen should be doing something too, even if that's just watching, which a lot of people do. And thank you all who are here watching and sharing. We love you guys. But to see somebody like you who has your own story, and you're taking on so much in your own life, and then you have just the biggest heart and you go online and you're helping to educate people, you're inspiring other survivors, you're shining a light on this darkness for people like me to learn, and you're doing it in these like short, concise videos, which is so cool. And then you start a podcast, like your hands are full, not to mention all the beautiful art that you do, which people can see in the background. I love, and it inspires me, to see somebody like you taking on the weight of the world, literally. So I'm really excited to have you here today and to get to share a little bit more about you, since you have been just so incredible with sharing with other people and inspiring others. So Kibbi, for people who are unfamiliar with you, and I encourage everybody, if you guys are watching right now, go into the show notes. Kibbi does have her own YouTube channel. All of her social media accounts will be down there, and we'll talk about those later. But please go follow and support her, and check out the episodes she's doing on her channel. She shares some stuff that we probably won't get into today, all of that. She has some really educational videos that you guys can go watch also to learn more from her on things like DID and trauma, and about her life. So Kibbi, let's go back in time and let's talk about your family. How far back have you been able to speculate potentially that this goes back? Did your parents experience any abuse that you know of? And sort of what's the backstory on your family?
So when my mom would abuse me, like I don't remember her saying this during rituals, but I remember saying it about other abuse. For example, shoving soap down my throat or mouth when she wasn't happy with what I was saying, she would do that. And she would say things to me like, it was done to me, so I'm doing it to you. And so, okay, to answer your question, I don't know, because my mom, I only know my grandma and my grandpa. My mom has kept everything else a secret from me. Reflecting back, I realize probably a reason why. And I don't know much about my grandma and grandpa, and I don't know what's truth or lies. So, as far as transgenerational, I do believe it's transgenerational because my grandma groomed me, and we'll get into that. And my aunt was a part of a killing ritual. So I don't know. I think it traces back. Clues, the biggest clue being is the intelligence behind the manipulation. I don't believe it could be formed within one generation. And other clues as well, like my grandmother grooming me. Her main method of grooming us was with porcelain dolls. Like, sounds silly, but okay. We had these porcelain dolls, and if they would break, my grandma would get really mad. So it was very important to her that we had a porcelain doll because anytime we went to grandma's house, we would play with these porcelain dolls and we would feed them potion. Now, there was no actual psychedelics on hand that I'm aware of, but potion was our code name for psychedelics. And so when we'd go to grandma's house, we'd be playing with these dolls and feeding them with a bottle. I think there was nothing in it or milk. It was like just basically our grandma telling us, you're supposed to feed. It wasn't basically, she would say, you're supposed to feed the baby's potion. You're supposed to feed your baby's potion. That's the way it works. Like when they need to calm down, feed them potion. And so I have reason to believe that I was fed potion when I was a baby just to calm down, just because my mother had a lot of neglect in her abuse. And this is just an assumption, but she would feed me the potion as well when I was a baby. And I have many clues as into why I believe that. They might come up as we talk more.
Absolutely. And what about your father's side? Did he ever mention anything about abuse, or did you have any clues on his side that this was something possibly carried down to him?
So I've gotten a little history about him. The church was strongly used against us, the Catholic Church, particularly Jesus or any role or figure that had authority. My mom would pretend to be them and righteous like them. He would tell me that his mom would make my dad like anytime he sinned, he would have to like kneel and say sorry to a Jesus statue and like hold on to it and be like, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. So I do believe, and then there was sexual abuse too on my father's side. Like my uncle has admitted to my father sexually abusing him. And anyways, my father turned out to be like a doormat, like super vulnerable, like just a doormat. Like he was the most insecure guy I've ever met, whereas the opposite would be like a secure man, like someone who knows what he's doing. He was like the most insecure guy I've ever met. And um, I know he really wanted kids, and he was with a girlfriend who didn't want any. So he met my mom in Minneapolis, actually. And my mom was ready to have kids. She got three of us out within 3 years. And so he broke up with that other girlfriend just to be with my mom, like right away. And that tells me that, like, he chose her because he's vulnerable. She's, a malignant narcissist who probably lured him in with love bombing. And then he became a bigger and bigger doormat. And she just used him to help fulfill her desires of getting these rituals done. I saw no authentic love between them, like nothing typical about a marriage.
Oh my God.
So,
Wow. And so your dad, do you think that he, because it would kind of make sense that if he did have some type of abuse, because it almost seems like he would have then been kind of not desensitized to it, but accepting of what she did. Because I try to think of like, a strong man going into a relationship and, you have a wife that's asking these horrific things of you to do. Like most people would be like, no, like you're crazy, and your dad,
mhm,
like you said, just seemed so broken down that he just went along with it. What did they
mhm.
what did they do for a living? Did both of them work? Did only one of them work?
My dad flopped around a lot. He had a interior design kitchen business and it failed. He was an alcoholic, lost his life to it. And my mother worked for a large banking company, I think, as a system analysis.
Wow. Oh my goodness. That's always interesting too for people to hear because I think when you think about abuse, the people doing it, there's this perception that we see in the movies and even in the news where they show us these sort of like beaten down, homeless looking people that are drug addicts, that do these types of things. And I think it's just out of the realm of comprehension for society to think that they could go to a bank and the person that they're working with is going home at night and abusing their child. So it's really shocking
Mhm.
to hear, like you said, the intelligence behind people. Like these aren't just like stupid, unresourceful people. These are like very intelligent and often successful people. Um,
Mhm.
and it's the people that, a lot of times people that you wouldn't expect. So thank you so much for sharing that. And you mentioned your mom had three kids within 3 years, which, wow. What was your childhood like after you were born? And was there anything significant about your birth, such as dates or anything that you can remember really young?
Nothing on dates. What I can remember really young is I could feel her energy before I could even talk, and I was not okay with it. I knew I could see her doing things that were evil, but when I could start to talk and form sentences, I would start to argue with her and say, this isn't right, this isn't right. I was very vocal. I was stronger as a child than I am now. Like I don't know where I got the gift of discernment. Um, so I would argue with her nonstop. She didn't like me. I don't think she knew she would have a kid that was opposed to her beliefs, but she did. And I have an older sister and a younger sister, and my older sister, I'm talking from age like 0 to 8. My older sister was always on my mom's side, and my younger sister was, for the most part, on mine. And we all got treated differently because, we all reacted to it differently. And so growing up was a lot of me standing tall on my beliefs. I also found faith at a young age because my mom, I before I always, well, the way I looked at it first was like my mom, I could tell my mom was following the darkness. She wasn't following the light. And the reason why I could tell that is because she was hurting babies, and babies have feelings like emotions, and I have feelings or emotions. So in my kid brain, when I saw her do these things, I'm like, if she's hurting something who has emotions like me, that's wrong. If she was like sacrificing a refrigerator, I don't think I would have felt the same way. But that was a huge clue to me that she was doing something wrong because she was hurting someone with feelings or emotions. So I realized it at an early age, and then when I started to speak about it, I argued about it, maintained that throughout the years, and she would actually lock me in a cage in the basement during dinner times often until I became too big for the cage around age 5 or 4. But she would like, there was like a 2 year period where she would, estimated 2 year period where she would put me in this cage at night so I wouldn't like brainwash my sisters because she thought I was brainwashing my sisters. And my memories in the cage, well, I'll get there. And well, my memories in the cage. So at first I was just like, not okay. And this is where I found my faith and realized that like faith is going to work for me. Faith showed me that there's beauty outside of my horrific family because as a child I was like, what is going on? And I assumed that there was beauty outside of this darkness, but I didn't know. So anyways, I'm in this cage locked up for the first time, and I'm not okay. Just going back thinking about it, it's hard. I was not okay in this cage. I was claustrophobic. I was so scared. Any noise I heard, I was scared that there was a ritual going on. And um, I was disgusted. I was ashamed. I felt guilty. The amount of grief that I had, I couldn't. Plus being like so claustrophobic, I had to like, or I felt like I had to like hold my bowels in. Um, it was horrible. And so I called on, like, at this point, I'm 3 or 4. I had already been going to church. And then I called on our creator or God to help me because I didn't know what to do. Like, no human was there for me. And Jesus and all these other people were being used against me at the church. And the only one that wasn't used against me was God. And we might get into the religious abuse, huge part of my story. But so I trusted God, and I called on God in the cage to like help me. And probably the first time I was in the cage, like I have so many actually peaceful and good memories of being in this cage rather than being afraid, because I did feel the presence of God show up and he took away my fear, which was a miracle. And it got to the point where I didn't mind the cage. Like I was okay in the cage, which sounds crazy, but like That's the truth. And I also loved having my feelings as a child, and the cage actually became like a therapeutic place where I could like be away from my family, be at peace, be calm, and have my feelings in this cage. And to me, like that experience of going from extreme fear to calling on my creator to come help me out and to be helped out strengthened my faith to no return. I lost it for for a little bit while I was in denial, but I didn't, it went away. I wouldn't say I lost it. I put it on a shelf, but I think that having the gift of discernment and finding faith at a really young age has really helped me and has been a part of my childhood.
And it's been a part of your whole story, which is beautiful. I've actually, as you were saying that, it made me reflect quick on how many stories I've heard of SRA survivors that they're the only ones that left of their family, that from a young age, consistently, a lot of them had faith somehow. And it's amazing to me because I didn't even become super congruent with that until really whenever I started this podcast, like I started meeting God through survivors and started, seeing spirituality in a different way and like being exposed to it on a deeper level than I ever had. But I struggled like my whole life. And I'm like, I don't remember a time whenever I was young where like I felt a really big connection. And I look at a lot of the SRA survivors, and that seems to be like something that separated them from the rest of their family was that they somehow did, and like were able to tap into that when things were so bad. Like their spirit could never be broken because they always had that connection where it seemed like the parents didn't have it. Some of the siblings never developed that. So it's really amazing that you had that with you, because it seems like your whole life was like the opposite of that. Like you didn't have people showing you goodness and love and, teaching you compassion and or even about faith. It was like you had to just live in the moment and wonder. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the sort of religious cover that your family had and how if that was there before you were born, and kind of what that looked like in your family dynamic.
It was there, that Catholicism, before I was born. They were Catholic. My experience is that growing up, we were like very into church. We went to church, we went to Sunday school. My mom had the statues. My real name is named after a saint. Um, she looked good on the outside. She looked like a Catholic. I think she used it as a front, or she was in a religious psychosis. I don't know. I'm still learning the origins of my type of abuse and the psychology behind it, but she would we would look good on the outside, and then at home when the sacrifices were happening or the rituals, she would use, or anything, she would use religious figures to like make herself, she would pretend to be them, the most being Jesus, which doesn't really make any sense. Like when she would sacrifice the kids, I'd be like, why are you doing this? Like, why? And she said she was a chosen modern day Jesus to like sacrifice other children. She said that it was her job to sacrifice children to wash away our family sins and everybody else's around us. So she told me we were doing good, coming from the idea of Jesus. Since Jesus did this, like now I'm doing this and we're doing this to wash away our sins and everybody else's around us. And I don't know if she honestly believed that. And then, like, at times when it wasn't the ritual, she would pretend to be as important as, I say Mary from the Bible because that's what she would tell me, Mary from the Bible, but also Jesus's mother Mary. And also she had this painting of Mother Teresa, and at times she would bring out, oh, I'm as important as Mother Teresa. It's like, okay. So it's very confusing. And then when the ritual stopped, which just has to go with do with my brainwashing and how I fell into denial, she quit religion cold turkey when I was 8 or 9 and took us from the private school and the Catholic church and put us into public and said, we're now spiritual, we're no longer religious, and put us in all these extracurricular activities.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing too, how many people hide behind some type of goodwill, whether it's a business that they own that's serving the community, even Freemasonry, and proclaiming that they're doing charity work, religion. There's so many areas, again, unexpected areas that are really hard for society to accept that really, really abusive and just perpetrators, these people that are just kind of beyond comprehension with what they're doing, and like they're hiding behind something like religion. Like that is so scary to think about, that there's people like that sitting next to us in church. And
Mhm.
oftentimes, like, a lot of people, and it's not every church, but just to think about who you're sitting by or who's leading your church, that some of those people may be involved with stuff like this. It's just really sick to think that that's a hiding place for people, and they go home and they do these horrible things. And obviously then the survivor grows up and whistle blows, and people are like, there's no way, like your mom or your dad or your grandma, like they're an outstanding member of the church, they're a pastor, like you're crazy. They don't do that type of thing, and it's like it's so intelligent how they're able to hide all of this. And so for you, what were your school years like? And did you grow up the whole time in Minneapolis? Did you live anywhere else? And what was sort of your childhood outside of your home life like?
I think right before I never lived in Minneapolis, right before my parents had kids, they moved to Wisconsin. So I'm from Wisconsin. And my school years at the Catholic Church were rough. I mean, they weren't the worst. They were rough. I had triggers. For example, I would like during prayer, I would like wet my pants because I couldn't handle it because I was confused. Like my mom's using this as a front. I would go home and that would happen. Or at church, I would not pass out, but I would almost pass out and like have to run to we called them bubblers, but drinking fountain to get some water. So growing up while I was at the Catholic Church, it was weird. It was awkward. I felt like I was a walking secret. Wasn't the best. And then when we moved to the private school, the public school, I don't know why. Um, but I think many reasons. But then things changed. For me, the rituals only happened from 0 to 8. So my dad died when I was 9 because he got cancer and died. My mom needed him to do the rituals. My mom told us growing up, I'll speak for myself. My mom told me growing up, the rituals are going to stop around age 10 so that she has time to convince me that they would end, I would forget. She would say, I have to stop the rituals by around the time you're age 10 so that you can forget. You need to have time to forget. So she was warning me before age 10 that she was going to brainwash me and um, tell me and convince me it never happened. I knew it was going to happen. I ended up getting brainwashed anyways. But so my father died when I was 9, and now we're out of the Catholic Church and we're in public school and all that. We're now spiritual. Then the second round of brainwashing happened, the one that got me. Her first round didn't get me, but her second round of brainwashing happened. And that's when she convinced us it didn't happen. She put us in so many extracurricular activities to distract us. And meanwhile, throughout this, like her sexual abuse continued until I was about 13, and her psychological abuse continued. Her emotional incest continued, especially with my sisters who were more obedient.
And so let's go back in your story. You had mentioned being very young and being on psychedelics, having these porcelain dolls that you would have to feed potion to. Let's talk about when the abuse started at home, and let's talk about your home life and what that looked like, and any experiences that you want to share throughout your childhood and those years of, kind of birth until 8, 10 years old.
As far as I can remember, it started since I could see. I have many memories that are maybe at like 40%. And then I have 4 rituals that I remember pretty well. I mean, well enough to share about them, well enough to give details about them. Um, yeah, I do I want to talk about them? It's hard. Um, yeah, I did experience rituals and a lot of sexual abuse in the most intelligent way, I would say, and manipulative and grooming way. I feel at least. The sexual abuse was a huge part of the rituals. Um, when I think of the four rituals I remember most, like one of them, for example, during the ritual, there was this barn ritual, and my dad showed up with, like, we're just sitting at this barn. My mom, my older sister, my younger sister, and I, and my aunt. And we're waiting for my dad to show up. And my aunt and my mom had this huge sense of frustration. They were just so upset with my dad for being late, and they were chomping gum, and I was so irritated, and I asked them to stop. They gave me candy. I wasn't happier. It didn't work, and I was so scared that a ritual was going to happen, and my dad was late, and they were so upset, and they kept chomping their gum. Gum chewing is a trigger to me to this day. And finally my dad shows up, like, with this baby, like 1 year old, in a cage. He like gets out of his Toyota and pulls out this cage with a 1 year old, and before I know it, he's tied up. I'm like tied up to a swing in a barn. This ritual took place at a barn, a rural area. They didn't all. Actually, some of them took place at home. And so I'm tied up. I won't speak about my sisters in this ritual, but the 1 year old was tied up as well in front of me. And this is the ritual that my aunt was forced to kill. So my mom was like the leader for me. Like, she was the leader in all this and what I experienced. I don't know who her high priestess is, if she has one, but she got off on making others kill. So for this ritual, and my mom had this thing with age, and hopefully I can articulate this and illustrate this better when I get to the sexual abuse, if we get there. But like, she had this thing with age, like people younger than her had to serve her, and then people younger than that person had to serve that person that was serving her. So basically she instructed my aunt to do the ritual and kill, and then my aunt instructed somebody else in the family to do it as well, and they did it a little bit as well. And so somebody else in the family and I were tied up on these swings. So we had my mom, my aunt, and somebody else in my family. And my mom and my aunt were and somebody else in my family, they were all like masturbating with broomsticks, like putting them between their legs and masturbating during the torture. Then after the torture would happen, or actually during the torture, after they would finish getting themselves off, they would come off and get the children off during the torture. And then finally, when everyone's done getting off in their little psychopath orgy, then the deed is basically over. Or at least it was in that ritual.
And so who were all the main perpetrators? Your mother and father obviously were involved, your aunt. Was this mostly familial, where it was family members participating in all of this?
Yes. No, yes and no. I'd say half and half. My mom lured in two other families I know with very vivid memories, and then two other families beyond that with not so vivid memories that I can't say for sure.
Right. And you mentioned at home and then in this barn, what were some of were there other locations that you can recall being taken to or that were important for your story as far as your abuse goes?
Just the barns, honestly. And at home, we lived in a duplex, and this was done in a duplex.
Oh,
Not all of them. Some of them were done at other people's houses who didn't live in a duplex, but I remember at least one done in a duplex.
oh my gosh, that is so hard to imagine. It's hard enough to think about that there could be a barn somewhere out in the middle of nowhere, that people are going to, or even not in the middle of nowhere. Some of this stuff, you can see on a map, or it's just, up a small driveway, from different stories that I've heard. But to think about a parent doing this with their children in the house that they live in, I mean, that is just a whole different level of sick, and then having the cleanup crew be your father. So how did that dynamic work as far as where your father was in charge of getting children or babies, I'm guessing at your mother's order. Where was he procuring these children from? as far as you can speculate. I don't know if you know that answer or not.
Well, growing up, um, first of all, I thought my family was the only one in the whole world who did these things. I thought I just got stuck with like a serial killer family. So now that I'm learning it's so much bigger, it's like, wow, I have some research to do. But growing up, I thought that my father got these kids from the public, from parks, from the market. I would even check the milk cartons. My mom was always so confident they wouldn't be there, but I would check the newspapers. And then in recovery, maybe like 6 months in, because the first 6 months of my recovery, I still was like, what did my family do? Like, I didn't know about satanic ritual abuse. And then after I started to get to know about satanic ritual abuse and all the trafficked kids, and I added two and two together. For example, my dad would be gone for a long period of time. Also, my parents are not my parents. My mom is way too smart to just take a kid off of the market, um, or from the public place. So I strongly believe they were trafficked. I don't know if they were paid for or traded for. I'm assuming so. And I don't know if she used footage of us. I remember her recording all of the rituals. I don't know if she used that to trade. Like, I don't know how he obtained the babies, but I assume that they were trafficked kids.
That would make the most sense. And I mean, there's so many different ways now that we know what we know where kids can get funneled, even legally to be procured for these programs, whether it's, CPS and foster care seems to be a hot spot for that, and even just normal trafficking that happens outside of that, it's as hot of a commodity in a sense as drugs, which is really scary, maybe even becoming more popular than drugs. I feel like trafficking is something that is just so big and it's happening in front of us. And it's just crazy that we don't see it, because once you do see it, it's like, oh my gosh, it could literally be hiding anywhere. But it's crazy to think about just this family that's living in a duplex. They're going to church, and then there's children being procured that aren't from your family or from anybody that and just being used for these horrific things. And so your father would he bring these kids to your home too?
Yeah, he would pick them up, and immediately my mom would go into the sacrifice. Like, there was only one that he would pick up, and we got to know for a couple hours. So,
Oh my gosh, that's so sad. And so they would do sort of a tag team where your mother would perform the ritual or sort of head it, and then your father was there for support to clean up and sort of tie up everything at the end. Is that how that would normally work?
yeah, that was their entire relationship.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Yeah, that's hard. It would be hard to speculate that there wasn't some type of like generational abuse on both sides because that seems like something that only somebody that had gone through something really, really horrible would be able to, contend with doing.
Mhm.
So that's really sad that you had to live in an environment like that. You couldn't even go home to get away from stuff. Like so much of what you went through happened at home. Would this be like, would they even try to hide it, like going into a basement or anything? Or would they just do this right in your, living room or bedrooms and like kind of common areas?
They were all in the basement. I remember one in the hallway, but the rest were in the basement.
Oh
And
my.
my mom, yeah, my dad had this whole toolbox. The main tools were brass knuckles, a bat, and a knife.
And were there other children involved in the ritual side of it versus the sacrificial side? Did they invite other family member children, or were there ever children that were sort of participating in the same way that you were forced to? Or was it mostly just always you and your siblings?
Yes. And then the way I was forced to participate is another story. So we'll start with the other people were they forced to. Yes, I've seen my mom. There was this one ritual on Halloween, which was random. Most of them were on the solstices or um, equinoxes or full moons, as far as I remember. But this one on Halloween, my mom lured in my friend's mom and somehow manipulated my older sister's friend, who must have been 7 or 8 at the time, I don't know, to kill and sacrifice her own cats. And so during this ritual, I don't understand, but my mom and her friend, my sister's friend's mom, were at the kitchen, which was like you could see the living room from the kitchen. It was all open doored. And then we're in me, my two sisters and I, and then my older sister's friend are in the living room, and my mom and her mom's friend are just talking, and I don't know how they manipulated the my sister's friend to sacrifice the cat, but she sacrificed the cat with so much joy. Like she was just going at it. She was so happy. I even have a picture of that day of all of our faces afterwards. My mom loved her trophies. So it was just our pictures afterwards, and we all looked bummed out except for the little girl who sacrificed her cats. And my job that day, as well as my sister's, was to make sure none of the mess got off of the tarp. And so while watching her do this horrific thing and look at her joy and be confused and scared and hurt, I'm also like, please don't get off the tarp. Like, please just don't. Like, I don't want to clean up the mess. Like, no. And thankfully, it didn't get off the tarp. It was super easy of a cleanup and it was just over. But that was one of the rituals that where she lured another person in. And then the ritual with my aunt, and then another one with a family's friend whose father, who was in his 20s, I don't know exactly how old, maybe mid 20s at the time. He dressed up as Minnie Mouse. I believe he got the costume from his daughter for Halloween. I'm not sure. But he dressed up as Minnie Mouse during this ritual, and he sacrificed a child with brass knuckles. And so my mom made him sacrifice. And while he was doing that, she was once again getting off to a broomstick, not flying in the air, just taking a broomstick, rubbing it on her crotch, and literally getting off to this torture. And then he would like get himself off, and then she'd get the children off as well.
And was that common? Your mom would do a lot of this for her own sexual gratification?
Yeah, like that was the main thing about it with her. Like, not only during the rituals, but outside of the rituals too. She had this sick thing called the carpet rub, and it's so sick. She would take a picture or not. Sometimes she didn't have a picture. So, picture or not, but if it was a picture, it would be of a day that a ritual happened. And she would be at a bed, right? And she would have this orgy, and she was getting off to her work, to her sacrifices, to her killings, if
Oh
that
my,
makes sense.
how horrible too that like again, this is happening like right in your own home, that you don't know what's going to happen whenever you come home from school, this could be just uh something that's waiting for you there and then having to sleep in the same home as all of this is going on. I mean, what a confusing childhood. And then the Minnie Mouse thing. That was actually the first video that I saw of you on TikTok that somebody had showed me or tagged me in, where you didn't go into detail, but you said something about if a child discloses to you that they saw or that they were abused by Minnie Mouse, look into it and believe them, essentially, like listen to them, and that was when I kind of learned that that was a part of your story. And that's another way that this stuff gets discredited. Like, what a crazy memory to have. And then you go tell people, like, hey, like Minnie Mouse, somebody dressed up as Minnie Mouse and abused me. People are like, okay, like that could never happen. And it's like, yes, it could. These people have these fetishes with kids. Like, is it so weird to think that, a pedophile or somebody that abuses children wouldn't somehow get off on like frightening the child and like traumatizing them with a child's costume, and
Mhm.
dressing up as these cartoon figures that like children usually look at with delight and joy, and like and like to watch, like then that becomes something really terrifying to you, and that's really sick to think that your own family members were doing this to you, and that you had these just disgusting incidences of, just trauma after trauma after trauma. And so while you were going through this, were you dissociated? Did you have any idea that this was happening whenever you were young? I know that you said that you were disclosing some. Did you know everything that was happening, or what was that kind of like for you to try to function? How did you get through this happening in those very, very young years?
During my very young years of 0 to 8, for the most part, especially 0 to 6, I fought so hard not to get disassociated. And I think I did, especially during the individual sexual abuse, the worst. I think it was easier for me to not disassociate when others were involved. But whatever the case, um, during the rituals, I had these defenses that, like, I would tell myself, this is happening, this is real. I would repeat myself the same phrase over and over so I wouldn't disassociate, because I saw others in my family disassociate and do bad things. And I wanted to hold on to the truth and not forget it. So I fought really hard as a child. For example, I would tell myself during the rituals, this is happening, this is real. After the rituals, my dad would hypnotize me with a yo-yo and say, that never happened, that wasn't real, that never happened, that wasn't real. And at the same time, in my head, I'm like, that did happen, that was real, or that did happen, he's a liar. So I would combat what they were saying a lot in order to stay conscious, and it worked. And thankfully, I don't relate to certain types of programming, and my dissociative identity disorder was created in a more spiritual way and happened later. So I didn't develop DID at a young age. I stayed conscious for the most part. What got me into trouble, where I became unconscious, is when my mom started brainwashing me into thinking it never happened. And when I would go and argue with her about the rituals, when that happened when I was like 9, she would say, that never happened. That wasn't real. You're the problem. You're crazy. Like, that's the round of brainwashing that got me into denial, that got me to disassociate from myself so much to form dissociative identity disorder, which happened later around age 13.
Was there anything else really important between sort of that 0 to 8 to 10 that you wanted to talk about? Any events or people in your life or anything that's important to the context of your story that you wanted to go over?
I Let's come back to that question. Maybe.
Okay. Well, let's pick up around that kind of age 9, 10, where this transition happened. And not just with the abuse, but within your family. Your father came down with cancer, and you guys experienced, going through that with him, and then a loss of a parent. Can you talk about that period of your life and sort of what was going on, and again, how you were coping with it, and that those events that were happening and sort of coinciding?
Sure. So my dad got cancer when I was 8, and it was evident to me like he was useless to my mom at this point. Then at this point, we quit religion cold turkey. We're now in the public school system. We're now spiritual. So the religious abuse just stopped, which was very confusing and also a dream come true, because it's like she's not doing this anymore. And so, excuse me. So my after my father died, my mom set us up for a grief support group, which was very confusing, because it's like, you care, like you care about us, you care about my father, since when did you care? So I went to the grief support group. I think it was just another example of her looking good on the outside. She loved to do that, Girl Scout leader, you name it. So it was very confusing to me, though, nonetheless, because he died and I was set up for this grief support group. And that was a confusing thing for me, because I wanted to believe that my mother cared. And so going through the ages after that, it was like anytime I would stand up for the truth, she would deny my reality. She would say, I'm crazy, I'm the problem, and that it never happened. And my sisters didn't have my back. They didn't say that it did happen.
That's so sad and confusing. Like you said, you have a narcissistic mother, but it's like she shows a side to sort of the public to look good. And then she has her home personality, which is very different. And again, with disclosing and trying to speak up about all of this, even or just, try to understand that dynamic must have been incredibly confusing for you. And so during that time, what were some of the things that she would do instead of, say, rituals, to mind control you or brainwash you, like you said? Was it suggestions that she would make and sort of like manipulative tactics, or were there other ways instead that she started abusing you in a different way?
Um, Commenting on my weight, which for me developed a whole 20 years of extreme dieting, trying to control my food, self destructive behavior, eating disorders or disordered eating, because she inflicted her own fear onto me about becoming overweight, which wasn't a concern. And she abused me in other ways too. I was a scapegoat of the family. She gaslit me. She brainwashed me into thinking that this never happened with it, which is nothing short of abuse. That is abuse and that is brainwashing. And she also scapegoated me because I chose a path of self-destruction, which I'm grateful for because I hurt myself rather than others like my mom. And when I chose a path of self-destruction, my family pointed a finger at me and said I was the problem. I was the problem. And then eventually, over the years, by the time I was 20, I believed them that I was that I was the problem. And then during my 20s, the worst 20s I can imagine, I was like drowning in my self destructive behaviors, walking around this planet telling myself, I'm the problem. There's something wrong with me. My family is great. They're awesome. I'm the mess up and they're on a pedestal and I'm just a crumb, if anything.
You mentioned a couple examples of religious abuse. I think that's another topic that gets sort of skimmed over a little bit because it is really common that people in these families do use and invert religion against the children that they're abusing, and then again go to church and put on this front, and then at home they're a whole different person. What are some other ways or I should say, what are some other examples of religious abuse, maybe for people who are new to this? Or even people who might have gone through and don't realize that, that's what they experienced.
Personally, I think that inflicting beliefs onto anybody is a form of religious abuse. Imposing beliefs onto somebody is a form of religious abuse, whether it's right or wrong. I think that people are entitled to explore and find their own faith and hold it true to their heart. And rather than promoting religion, I think it's about attraction, walking with grace, leading with example. And I see it a lot. I see religion being opposed onto others as if people have asked, but they haven't. And I think that's a very slight form of religious abuse, but I think it can go to the extremes like my mother as well.
100%, yes. And I deal with that, in a small way. I try to be compassionate about that with my podcast because there's people that have experienced that. And, unfortunately, and this isn't, to say that people can't believe what they want because we all need to, faith is something that I think is really important, and how we find that is like a very personalized journey. And whether it's, people sort of in the peanut gallery that feel really strongly about it and like want to sort of proclaim that over anybody who thinks different, or the person that is, the mother of the family or somebody in one of these families and systems that is pushing that on a child, like there are boundaries that we should have where, a lot of if like my favorite food is steak, like I don't go force everybody to like have to have that be, their favorite food and like the only thing that they have, or my diet or my political beliefs, and we
Mhm.
get really caught up sometimes, I think, in doing that in minor ways, even as adults, and not considering, is the person that I'm putting this on traumatized from this, or did they go through something, or could this be a sensitive spot, or maybe they grew up having completely different beliefs that like turn them off to religion in general, and I think that religious abuse is like, it's a covert thing, because it's masked as something good. And it is good, like inherently, if somebody is, using religion in like a really positive way. They're not abusing people with it, or like they're not in these families. It's just literally something that helps get somebody through something, and a core value and a belief system and something that is the person's faith that they're pouring that into. It can be really beautiful, but I think that is a big problem in society. It turns into almost like this politics game, where people have these really stout beliefs and they push it on somebody when there might be something that was really hard with that belief with somebody, and I try to think about myself being a child, and like if I had parents that did that to me, it'd be so confusing to like be abused by these people that are using these like religious figures, like how you were talking about Jesus and these different things that your mom would say, or these different people that she would be, or these reasons why she would do this abuse, and like tie it to religion. That's really scary to think about that happening, and like how confusing religion can be. Did you struggle? I know you said that you had faith, and whenever you didn't have it, it wasn't that you lost it, you put it up on a shelf. But did you have like, a child where like that was really, really challenging for you,
That what was challenging for me?
holding on to that faith?
Only when I fell into denial, it started to go away. When I picked up the coping mechanisms, it started to go away. And then I put it on a shelf. And then when I started recovery at age 30, in reference, I'm 36 now. When I started my mental recovery at age 30, I had to find my higher power again. And that was confusing for me to find it, but it's been a beautiful, beautiful journey of refinding that connection that I had with my higher power, who I choose to call God or our creator, as a child. And yeah, I'd love to tell you about it because it's such a beautiful journey. I love talking about faith.
Yeah.
So when I started recovery, I started the 12-step rooms because I'm such a religious abuse survivor. I wasn't going to sign up for a church, and no disrespect for people who heal through Jesus or the church. I think whatever works for us is beautiful. That's like the beauty of recovery, in my opinion. But I knew for me, because of my abuse, a church wasn't going to work. And in fact, the first year of my recovery, if anyone said Jesus or talked about religion, I was like out the door, like, just don't. Like, I couldn't. And so when I started the 12 steps and got to the second and third step, which is where they suggest to come to believe in a higher power than yourself that could restore you to sanity, I like insane, in my opinion, because I was in denial. And to me, denial is a form of insanity. So the second step of the 12 steps is come to believe in a higher power greater than yourself that can restore you to sanity. Okay, so I started doing that, and I forgot about all my memories as a childhood. And so I like was driving to work one day, and I pulled over and I saw this mountain, and I'm like, I'm just going to pray for it, like the 12 step says. Like, I believe that this mountain is a power greater than me. I mean, look at it. It's huge. It's a power greater than me, or at least I think so at this moment. So I prayed to it, like, hey, are you my higher power? If not, like, where are you? Who are you? I'm lost. And so for that day, my higher power was the mountain. And then for the next days, and another thing the 12 steps taught me was that as long as I find a higher power greater than myself and I keep praying to it from the bottom of my heart, and I mean it, it will be revealed to me. And then eventually over time, and then after I remember the sacrifices, I was super triggered. And then I'm like, I'm just going to call it my higher power. So for about a year more in my recovery, I just called it my higher power. And then I had the really good flashbacks of my childhood. And then I started calling it God. And now I also use the term our creator, because I don't know the term. I don't know the name. And that's the thing. I'm extremely religiously abused. I'm extremely religiously confused. And in my recovery, I'm figuring that out. And the only thing that I can truly grasp right now is my creator or God or whatever that force name is. Like, that's who's been there for me. And I'm at a point in my recovery where I'm exploring the rest, but I do it at low doses because for me, my relationship with that source is the most important. So I want to spend most of my time rather than researching and figuring out what's right and wrong. I do want to spend time doing that because I love forming my own beliefs. I love beliefs and expressing them, but I also want to prioritize my relationship with my higher power. The third step in the 12-step program is to turn my will and the life over to the care of God as I understand him. And that is a huge part of my recovery. It's not my will. If I turn my will and my life over to the care of my higher power or God, I'm okay. Like I feel safe. And that's one thing I love about recovery is the simplicity of it. When I was in denial and living in chaos, there was no simplicity. It was black and white. And in recovery, I find so much of a gray area in simplicity when it comes to recovering my faith. And I love that. I love simplicity.
Absolutely. What are some, or I guess maybe advice is the word I'm looking for. What advice would you give to people listening on ways that they can be more compassionate to approach people about their beliefs? And what are some things that have been really triggering to you in your recovery, having these memories and, sharing your story publicly?
One thing is when I started sharing my story, to answer the second question, then we'll get to the first. I did express a little bit about my Jesus trigger because I was curious. I'm curious Kibbi, like I want to know answers so I can form my own beliefs. And so I tried to engage with the audience, and I did receive loving messages about my Jesus trigger. Don't get me wrong, I did. I did. But I also received literally hundreds of messages in my inbox talking about how Jesus was the right way and imposing their beliefs onto me. And I appreciate the love that from the people that said Jesus still loves me. Um, but I didn't appreciate the messages because in the post I said, let's talk about it below. Like, let's leave it like to the comments, and literally hundreds of page-long messages about imposing their beliefs onto me. It was scary. And what was the first question?
Things that advice for society on how they can maybe approach this more compassionately towards survivors and just in their everyday life if they are somebody that has a really strong belief, whether it's in God or something else.
If somebody is a good person and has good behaviors and they don't impose their beliefs onto me and their behaviors are out of kindness, are out of grace, are leading by example, are not manipulative, are not controlling of me, are not trying to change or shape me, but rather loving and accepting me for who I am, encouraging me, being my cheerleader, and vice versa. I'm not going to say no to a relationship just because I don't have the same faith as somebody. And usually, when people in my life and I don't have the same faith, we just don't talk about the faith. We talk about the other things that we connect to. So I think my advice would be like, why judge? Why judge the religion or the faith? I think the better thing to judge for our own safety and well-being is the behaviors of others, how it makes us feel, how it contributes to our life, how we contribute to that individual, how healthy the relationship is, because I don't want to lose out on any relationships that are golden to me just because we have a little bit of a difference in the way we believe.
Absolutely. And I loved how you mentioned focusing on what you have in common. We all have something in common with everybody. It might not be much, but I'm sure we can find something, and like you said, if the person's behaviors, if they're contributing positively in the world, they're not out there abusing kids. I mean, really, like, especially in this community, I think we forget in the survivor community as adults that, like, we all want the same thing. We all want exposure. We all want justice. We all want to make the world a better and safer place for kids. We want survivors to have a voice and to have armies behind them and support. And, whether that's through judicial means where you have, whistleblower protection in a sense, or if that's just us coming up behind you and saying, hey, we got you. We let these really like catty things get in our way sometimes. And I think it can not only dilute the message and the mission, but it divides us instead of, again, coming together and saying, all right, can we put these beliefs aside? Can I put my religious belief aside and your political belief aside? And we connect over our mission and like the thing that we have in common. Like we're good people, we're trying to do good things. We're not harming each other or, we're not perpetrators. Like we're on the side of protecting children and whistleblowers. Like can we come together and focus on that, and I think the more that we do that, and you do such a good job like encouraging that conversation in your audience, and I love that, and it's something I really try to be open-minded to myself and to express to people, because it is like our beliefs are really personal and they are emotional. Like we all had an emotional spiritual journey or not, on how we came to a belief or how we left a belief system, and are sort of seeking it or learning. And to have compassion for that, I think is really important because it is such a personal, emotional thing. There's some things like maybe favorite foods we could talk about and disagree about that like don't really touch us emotionally. We don't get offended by, but a lot of times, like when we're really pushy with our religious abuse or our religious beliefs, it can turn into abuse maybe, and like it's not our intention. So I love that you expressed it that way, and I completely agree with you. I want to talk more about your healing journey, but before we do, let's go back to maybe your teenage to 20s, and let's talk about what was life like then. Were you transitioning out of your family? Like, how did you end up getting out and getting safe? And what was that journey like for you during that period of your life?
The teenage years is when I found my coping mechanisms. I found disordered eating, all different ways to try and control my weight, which thankfully, through the grace of God and recovery, these coping mechanisms I've recovered from starting in 2018. But I just filled myself up with self-destructive coping mechanisms in my teenage years. Convinced myself, I'm not even going to say I convinced myself. I was brainwashed to believe that it never happened. And then I convinced myself to love my family because I felt like I was the problem and it was the right thing to do. And then I put them on a pedestal, and then I got thoroughly confused. I was very confused during all of this. And then um, I picked up more coping mechanisms, basically around eating, and then I picked up Adderall when I was 16. I did that for a couple years. Compulsive running. I was a compulsive runner for 15 years. I know it sounds healthy, but I took it to an extreme where it was not. Nothing felt better than running for miles and miles, and I mean miles, and then getting a runner's high because I just felt like I was running away from the secret, the truth. So that was another coping mechanism. And then when I got through high school barely, and my mom was she didn't want me to do well. And she didn't treat my sisters like that. She treated me like that. And I believe that's because I was so strong and opposing to her beliefs. She wanted to shut me down. So after high school, I didn't do much college. I dated somebody. I was in denial. I had my coping mechanisms going down while I was dating him. I wasn't on any drugs or alcohol. But then when I was 21, I hit a new rock bottom. I started working at a club to pay for a private college. I wanted to go to a private college. And I made a lot of money at this nightclub. And I worked there from 21 to 23. But while I was there, like 4 months in, somebody was like, "Do you want some Percocet?" And I'm like, "What's that?" And they gave me it. And I think like 2 months later, on a day I had off, I tried taking the Percocet and I was like, I love this. And it just took me away from the trauma. And I was addicted to opiates from 21, 22 to 23. And then I hit a rock bottom while working at this club. Like all of my money was going towards the opiates, or I was addicted to gambling and slots. And so at 23, I was like, I'm going to look at a rehab because my true self would never do drugs. My true self would never do any of these coping mechanisms. And that's something that confused me along the way, right? Because I knew deep down I had a faith. And it's like, why would I be doing these things? My creator wouldn't be my creator didn't create me like this. Like something happened. And so I hit a new rock bottom at 23, and I'm like, I'm going to rehab. And I looked them up, and they were in great cities. Actually, I thought I was going to find one close. So I tried Florida first. I went to Florida. Things got worse before they got better. I was only there for about 4 months. I ended up relapsing. I was living out of my car. A drug dealer stole my car. So I'm like living in Florida with nothing. And then some people gave me an intervention on on Atlantic Avenue in Delray Beach, and they were like, you should go to the West Coast. Like, this isn't working out for you here. And so I went to the West Coast, like with literally nothing when I was 23, and I've been there since. And that was in 2012. So I look at it as I physically got away when I was 23. I ended up getting sober when I was 24, but from 24 to 30, even being sober, I was still using coping mechanisms. I was still getting sicker in my denial. I was still loving my family more. I was still putting them on a pedestal more and saying I was the problem more. I just got sicker and sicker until I started getting help at age 30.
And so what was that like? Did you have a defining moment, or was this an intervention again that sort of brought this to light? What was that starting point for you in transitioning from all this trauma, all these coping mechanisms to, gosh, I really need to make a change in my life and like I can do it. Like I'm gonna heal and like start being healthier.
So, my main coping mechanism, which I'm just starting to talk about because it's like the number one thing I'm shameful about, but I'm actually releasing a podcast episode where I'm going to be talking about this before this, what we're doing is going to be released. So, my main coping mechanism was, and I share this stuff because sharing my truth, or excuse me, the truth on social media tremendously helps me heal. So, I love it. I use social media a lot to help me heal, or the internet, whatever you want to call it. But what my deciding factor was, so my disordered eating was chewing up food and spitting it out. And it progressively got worse. Like it got really bad, especially in my 20s. I spent a lot of time and money doing it. A lot of my teeth are crowned, a bunch of dental work was done. It took away my life. Um, it was bad. And when I was 30, just turned 30, it was like I had enough. I mean, I remember being at drive-throughs and just waiting for my food and having thoughts of, I think I'm doing this to defend my parents. Like something's going on. And I knew I didn't remember age 0 to 9. I openly told people I didn't remember age 0 to 9. And my sisters never had an explanation for that. My mom denied everything on her part, would make up and made up this one elaborate story. But um, so at age like 30, just when I turned 30, that's a big year being in the 30s. And I remember telling myself, I went on a trip with a friend and I didn't chew up or spit out food at all. And I remember telling myself, if I go back home and if I do it again, I'm going to get help. It was just a promise I made with myself. And I lasted a few days and then I did it again. And then the first program that I went to was a 12-step program called Overeaters Anonymous, which was very accepting with my disordered eating. And then that was the beginning of my recovery. Once I put the disordered eating down, which by the way, I picked up because it was chewing and spitting. And I learned this habit from childhood because I was fed human flesh so many times. And when my mom would feed me the human flesh, I would chew it up because she would make sure I would chew it up. She would give it to me and make me sure I would chew it and eat it. But I tricked her and I would spit it out when she wasn't looking. I'd pray she'd never say anything to me. She never did. But I would spit it out so I would feel less guilty. So I pick up this chewing up food and spitting it out coping mechanism because it was like reliving my past. And I felt like if I could just make this chewing up and spitting out thing a thing in my life, I can be shameful about that and not be shameful about the past. I can just forget the past. And that's exactly what I did. And that's why today, as a 36-year-old woman, when I share my story and talk about this chewing and spitting, I am so shameful about it because I am shameful about it. But the real shame comes from what I was fed as a child.
Absolutely, yes. And that's so common. I really appreciate you sharing that because I know these triggers and like things that we pick up from trauma can be really vulnerable. You know, it's like a vulnerable part of ourselves that we're sharing. And I really appreciate you sharing because that is common. You know, I've had multiple people on here come on and share their vulnerabilities and things that they are now coping with as an adult to sort of mitigate the trauma and realize and kind of connecting it, being like, oh, I do this and like I feel some sort of like gratification or I feel the shame leaving, or that I can cope with it better when I do this thing, and it's very healing to look at that, to express it and be able to connect it, and to not feel shame about it anymore, to put the shame back where it belongs, which is on the
Mhm.
person and people that made you do these things to begin with, that gave you these side effects, that we now carry into adulthood. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us. At what age did you, because now you do remember things between age 0 and 8/10, where you had that missing memory gap. When did your memories start to surface, and how did that look for you? Was it all at once? Did you get them in pieces? And what was that like?
So, I started recovery in 2018, and when I put the chewing and spitting down right away, panic attacks were happening. And I think those were flashbacks waiting to come up. For example, I remember driving to work two times, I think, and I had panic attacks and I couldn't even drive home. Like I had to have a friend come pick me up to drive me home. I called off of work. I didn't know what was going on. But then once I got to the fourth step, which is taking personal inventory in one of the 12-step programs, the trauma program, like I had support. I had my faith. I had so much support. It was like a year before the pandemic. So I was going to these meetings in person, which was a beautiful thing for me. Like I need a village of support. And even my therapy was in real life at that time. But so when I got to the fourth step in the ACA program, 12-step program, it's like a childhood trauma program, my flashbacks came up and I took a year off of work. It was in 2019. I put a rubber band on my wrist because I would go back in time so much that I almost got 2019 tattooed on my wrist because I would go back so much. And a lot of what it was like was learning how to spend my time having these flashbacks, because if I spent too much time on it, it would be detrimental. It wouldn't help me. If I spent too little time on it, I was avoiding it. So for a year, thankfully, I didn't have to work and I could just focus on filling my life in a way where I had support. It was structured so I had support, but I could also have time to have my flashbacks and also do things I enjoy, like going to see the sunset, walking with my higher power early in the morning, going to the beach barefoot, um, just anything that brought me joy. So during the flashbacks, I do remember prioritizing balance. It was important for me, but it was also so scary to remember that my family was our serial killers, to remember all this. It was so scary and it hurt so much to lose my family because, like I said, I convinced myself that I loved my family. I believed a lie. I believed a lie and thought I loved my family. So when all this came up, I stepped back and I was like, oh my gosh, they're not mentally healthy for me. I don't love them. I want to work through this, forgive them, get to a place of perhaps indifference or compassion, but they're not for me. They're not mentally well enough for me. And that burned, that hurt.
Oh my gosh,
And
imagine.
yeah, so
Yeah.
all in all, I had a lot of flashbacks. They were very scary. I had support. I had ways to navigate and talk through them. And most importantly, I gave myself time to have the feelings.
When you had all these memories and flashbacks, what were the steps that you took with your family?
Well, I was 30 years old. So my younger sister was 29 and my older sister was 32. And I actually started embracing the trauma with my younger sister. We were like, something happened. Mom has control issues. She was even admitting to me like some memories she had about sexual abuse. And, I was in 12 steps at the time. And I'm like, hey, like they're teaching me about this higher power and how to reconnect with faith. Like, do you want to jump on it with me? And she wasn't so interested in the 12 steps, but she was interested in like unraveling this with me. But then once I remembered the sacrifices, she was like, no, no, I'm out. And since then, my younger sister is the only one in my family who I've ever loved. And I still love her. I'll never stop loving her, even though she's probably scapegoating me, calling me crazy at this time. I will never stop loving my younger sister ever. And so sorry, I get emotional about my younger sister. So we started working it together, and then she bounced, and since then she respects that I've looked at my trauma, but she's asked me, she set a boundary with me not to bring up the childhood and not to talk about trauma with me. So over the past 5 to 6 years, our relationship is like as thin as dental floss right now. And ever since speaking out, nobody from my family has called or reached out to me, even though I have evidence that they have seen my content. So that's my younger sister. My mom, the 2 times I brought it up to her, she, and I kind of did in detail, but not much. She went to the hospital for a week, and they say it was the underlying health conditions or whatever, but also an anxiety attack. I believe that her anxiety attack got her there, and with her anxiety and her underlying health conditions, she stayed for a week both times. So both times I brought it up to my mom, she went to the hospital for anxiety and underlying health issues. And even today, as my family has seen my content, I don't think my mom is looking at it. I think it would trigger her too much. I think it's my older sister. My relationship with my older sister, as I've discovered and uncovered all this, first off, my older sister and I have never gotten along. Even during my years of denial, I never loved her. I more so put my mom and my younger sister on a pedestal. But my older sister has extreme defensiveness towards this. And when I brought it up to her, the last time I spoke to her was in 2019. And I just said cult and rituals. I didn't go into details. And I also did like express some concern too, like, hey, this is transgenerational. And she got extremely defensive towards me, was saying that I'm extremely mentally ill and I'm a drug addict and I'm going to end up on the side of the street dead. She said that I'm the biggest disgrace to not only our family, but society. She said, I've messed up our entire family. She said, I've done so much harm for our family. I've never done any good. She said, I've only taken from my family. She said, I've basically been the monster of the family, and got extremely defensive over the phone. And that's the last time I talked to her, although the authorities have talked to her
Oh
since.
my gosh. Wow. It's amazing too how that happens, and how the one person that starts to talk about the truth gets incredibly outcasted and gaslit or just shut off, like how your one sister was like, just you can talk to me, but not about that. And it's like, well, gosh, like that's such a big thing to talk about. Like there's a giant elephant in the room. Like I don't know what else to talk to you about. It feels weird
Mhm.
talking about anything else. So that's really sad that your family reacted that way, and but you see how strong these mind control programs are, and the shame and the guilt and that loyalty that they condition you really since birth to have, and that can be hard, I think, too, for people to understand is like, well, why don't you just leave it? And it's like, well, for one, there's retaliation a lot of times that's, that comes with physically leaving these systems. That's a whole nother story. But there's the embedded generational, trauma that a child gets from very early on, where the guilt and shame is like the first things that the child knows. It's not, nourishment and love and compassion. A little infant is already being shamed and guilted, and
Mhm.
been teaching things that are completely inverted from what a child should know, so it's really sad that that's so strong even as an adult, that it becomes this amnesiac wall almost to like having a relationship with somebody. It's just they just shut it off and suck it back down, and just put it back, compartmentalize it, and move on with life, which is sad because like you look at your journey and like you're able to smile and like have a good quality of life and like experience love and like create all the experiences for yourself and emotions for yourself that you weren't able to have and feel as a child, and it's really sad to think people live an entire lifetime without getting to experience that. So that's really brave of you to have gone to them, and I'm really sorry for the response. And it's just so common. Like I haven't heard many other exceptions. It's almost always the truth teller that just gets completely shunned, and looked at as like the crazy one. But it's really admirable what you did, Kibby. And so one of the things that I wanted to bring up, there was another ritual that you wanted to talk about today. And so I want to talk about you making the decision to speak out. But before that, let's tie that into it and share that part of your story, because I know that that was an important part too of of remembering.
Sure, yeah. I am trying to gain the strength to talk about this on my podcast. So this is great practice. And I think it's going to be hard to, especially just by myself, just getting up in front of a screen and talking about it. I don't know how I'll do it yet, but the most traumatic event of my life was with an 8-year-old named Sam. And I think the reason why I'm so scared to talk about it is two. One, I don't want to just, I think maybe you can read between the lines and figure it out. And two, because with any of these rituals, if any of them get invalidated, it's like not even a personal attack. It's like the kids, I'm, I'm just don't know how to handle that yet. I'm learning how to take the hate and the discredit and people calling me delusional and all that. And that I think I can deal with. But when I talk about these rituals, when the kids are invalidated, it's so hard for me. So with Sam, I'm in a practice, and that is that when I was 5, almost 6, in December of 93, my dad brought home this 8-year-old, and all the other kids that were sacrificed were like babies or infants. And this 8-year-old comes home, and part of my mom, she kind of reminds me of Charles Manson. She literally got off to other people killing, like literally had sexual orgasms. And that included people in my family. And she also got off to, I'll speak for myself, me eating the human flesh as well, and other things around the rituals. She got off to a lot of it. She would use a lot of the abuse to literally get off to sexually. Like she didn't go to a human being for sexual experiences. She went to the abuse she was doing for sexual experiences. Anyways, my dad brings home this 8-year-old boy in the winter. I'm in the Midwest. It's cold, it's snowy, and he's over for dinner. And throughout the whole evening, not the whole evening, like 2 hours prior, my mom's calling it the Last Supper. She's like, okay, get ready for the Last Supper, get ready for the Last Supper. I wish I put two and two together. Anyways, my dad finally comes home as she's preparing dinner. She's almost done preparing dinner. And my dad's like, this is Sam, this is your new brother. And I was so happy to have a brother. And he was so happy. He was so trusting. He was so full of light. He was so amazing. And we had dinner with him, and we went to Disney on Ice like a day or two before. So we had like light up snowballs, and Sam and I would play with them and on the dinner table. And Sam expressed his fascination to lights with me. I've never heard anyone express such fascination with lights, but he was just this kid full of joy and dreams and aspirations, and was so excited to be there with our family. And then all of a sudden, after dinner, and so we must have spent an hour and a half or 2 hours with him during dinner. And after dinner, like when it was time for cleanup, um, my dad was always in charge of cleanup. He wasn't always at the rituals. And that night after dinner, I remember my older sister cleaning up dinner with my dad, and I assume cleaning up the other stuff as well, because roles would change, as age has progressed. And I believe that towards the end, or like my older sister was, I don't know, but I don't know. That's just an assumption. My after dinner, like all of a sudden, real quickly, Sam gets tied up in the hallway of our duplex. And um I'm on the right, and the only person I've ever loved in my entire life is on the left. And my mom did not sexually please herself during this ritual. My mom had a very strong sense of urgency. She often had a sense of urgency. And she gave me a knife in my right hand, and she was like, it's your turn, Kibby. You kill him. And I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I wouldn't. And I thought she would force me to do it, but that wasn't good enough for her. She wanted me to willingly do it. And she got so mad at me for not doing it. And so I'm thinking like one of two things can happen. They're either going to let Sam go or they're going to kill me. And like, okay, like I'd rather have that happen than for me to kill him. And I didn't do it. And she didn't force me to do it, but rather she made someone else do it. And that's what kills my heart. Like the worst thing possible could have happened. And then I think that was supposed to be my night for drinking the Kool-Aid. So I think I got out of drinking the Kool-Aid, but somebody else had to. And then a couple of days later, I was forced to eat his flesh. And it wasn't my first time chewing up and spitting out flesh, but it was my first time chewing up and spitting out flesh from a victim that I knew and loved. And I consider that when I don't even want to say drink the Kool-Aid. I consider it more as taking sips, but that's the most traumatic event that also in a way saved me, I feel, because when I was remembering these things, that's the first thing that came up was Sam, Sam, Sam. And I didn't have my feelings as a child about it, but I got to and recover, and I get to continue to have my feelings about it because it's so painful.
That's one of the saddest things for me too is, whenever I hear these stories, like in a really sick, twisted way, like it's beautiful now that we get to share this because some sort of light can be shed on a life that like nobody cared about, nobody asked about, that was just gone and never had anything said for it, and like that's what you're doing is like giving Sam his life and his little bit of justice of just having his story heard, and not being able to like live out those aspirations that you heard. And it's terrifying to think, again, where's your dad getting these kids from? Why is this kid happy to be there? Like, what kind of situation was he in before he saw you guys? If like that was like a relief and like made him happy to be there, I was thinking about that too. Like, if I was a kid, I'd be terrified to be at some stranger's house for dinner, and
Exactly.
so it's like, what did he go through before that? And that's really, really sad to think about because he was like in an abusive situation, didn't know it, and like was just thrilled to be there, and it's so sad to think about these things happening and like trying to contend with that as a child. Like I cannot even imagine, and even you having to contend with giving up your own life before you're 10, like trying to consider what that would be like. Most kids don't even like have a conceptualization of death, until they get older, and here you are like trying to balance a check of like, okay, do I pay with my life by not doing it? And like I'm okay with that? Or do I go and commit this act that like I'm being pressured and essentially forced to do, and it's terrifying how that happens. Cause yeah, like no matter what that is, and no matter what the decision is, like your mom had her mindset either way. If you would have done it, then it would have happened. And then because you defied it, she still had somebody else commit the act anyways. Like it was going to happen no matter who did it?
Right. I know.
Sad. Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing that, Kibby. I know that these events are just they're so hard. It's so healing at the same time, and somebody needs to hear about that because you're not the only one that's something like that has happened to, and it can be really painful for somebody to be alone with that. So thank you for
Mm.
sharing and for practicing on here. It's an honor to get to listen to your story. This is all stuff that none of us should hear, and Sam, I ask everybody to just say a prayer over him too, in whatever way that you do, and Kibby for coming out and sharing about all of this. It's really hard. So diving back into your story, so you're getting these just horrific flashbacks. You're remembering these things that no child should ever have to go through and no adult should ever have to remember. And you're contacting your family. They're basically abandoning you, even if they're agreeing to still speak with you. It's not about this. You're not allowed to bring this conversation to your family. What happens next in your journey? Do you struggle with that? Or is that something where like your convictions were just so strong that you're like, screw it, like I'm fine, I don't need to talk to them? What was kind of your process after that? And what was the next step in healing that you started to take after that confrontation period?
I tried to love my mom at least, actually, during my recovery. It didn't work. I found that a place of indifference sits best for me, feeling indifferent towards my mom and actually having compassion because I know that she went through this. And I think me speaking out has been like the ultimate cutting ties. I mean, they've seen my content. They're not calling me saying, hey, you're making allegations over the public internet that our family sacrificed kids and ate human flesh. Are you okay? Like, what's going on? Like, they're not, it's dead. It like feels done. Like, the relationship with my family feels dead and done. And I'm okay with that because I've built my own.
Yeah, and that's so brave of you too to, make that step. That's not something anybody should have to experience either. At the same time though, it can be extremely healing to get away from all of that, and it can be really crucial in somebody's journey, whether they do or don't. So you're so brave for doing that. Has anything good or bad happened as a result of leaving? Were you able to talk to any authorities? Has there been any positive progress in sort of trying to bring justice to this at all, or not? Has it been sort of the opposite for you?
Well, leaving my family and my personal life, my well being, and my spiritual health has been nothing but great. But when it comes to the authorities, it's been nothing but garbage. Well, the first authority that I went to about 5 years ago, I actually went and I'm like, hey, with a lawyer, and I'm like, hey, please check this name out. Say I'm 8 years old, Chicago. It didn't have a match. And that was a sign to me that either my mom lied to me or he came from a broken place or both. Like, because I know I recited that in my head during the entire ritual, so I wouldn't forget. My situation with the authorities. So the first one was like kind of like, okay, like only if somebody else within the cult comes forward. And I don't agree with that, but that's what he said. Okay, whatever. And um I worked with him for like 5 years, like trying to get him to look at this. It's transgenerational. Like, please look into my sisters. Like, we just don't know. And nothing, nothing. They're like, we need somebody else to come forward. My therapist at the time called CPS to tell them about this. They didn't do anything. I called the FBI. They accused me of prank calling them. So I mean, I'm doing this all when I'm healing. I'm like, this is a lot right now. And so that 5 year relationship with that detective, which went nowhere, ended in the beginning of this year, actually. And so I'm like, okay, I'll call the last city I haven't called yet. Um, Mind you, it's hard to do these things like as a survivor. But so I called, I made my allegations, I made my report, and I expressed my concern for it being transgenerational and that my sisters were in denial and that we don't know. Like, we just don't know what's going on. It's a cult. And what they ended up doing with that. And I learned this within the past month as I finally received my copy of the report is that they literally said, mind you, Kibbi is not my real name, so real names are changed. Um, the detective contacted Kibby's sister. Kibby's sister told me Kibby has several mental health issues and a drug problem. Kibby's sister was aware of Kibby's allegations as she has made them in the past. No further investigation to follow. And that really hurt me because it's like, how are you not going to check her allegations? Why would you call someone within the cult to fact check? And to this day, he starts work every day at 8 p.m. or something like that. So around that's 6 p.m. my time. And I'm just like, should I call him today? I'm waiting for the day to just call and say, like, where's your critical thinking in that?
Well,
Calling someone within the cult to fact check. And okay, I get that. If he's going to call someone within the cult to fact check, at least fact check her allegations. Call my therapist, call my doctor, call anyone in my life. Find out about me. Check those allegations. And they weren't. The case was closed. And mind you, I first went to the authorities 5 or 6 years ago. If they would have done something, if someone in my family has repeated this transgenerational trauma, they failed to protect people for the last 5 or 6 years. So I understand how authorities like literally need hard evidence, like a bunch of it handed to them oftentimes to investigate. But I think it's time our authorities wake up to this issue. I'm starting to do something when I see an authority at Fatburger or anywhere out in public. I will ask, do you know what satanic ritual or ritual abuse is? And not one has said yes. Why aren't they being taught this? Now, I've only asked four so far. I just started this journey and I'm telling them, like, I'm a survivor. You're supposed to protect us. Please go learn about this and don't ask Google, don't ask Wikipedia. Find the testimonies and protect us because I was failed to be protected and I continue to failed to be protected because no one's looking into this. And guess what? Now I'm speaking publicly and my family has all the time that they want to hide any evidence that they have because I've had to come out and use a loudspeaker. So, in my opinion, they made things worse. And they potentially harmed me by calling my older sister because that put my older sister's eyes on me.
It's just horrible. And it's such a playbook, and yeah, like, why isn't this like the main thing that they're taught? Because if they're taught about this, then the rest of what they should be looking for, like this overview going into like satanic ritual abuse and trauma-based mind control and other methods used to, create extreme trauma within a child and dissociation. Like if you understand that, then you can understand a lot of the other traumas that sort of fall under it, domestic abuse and pedophilia. Like it all sort of like it's all encompassing, all of that is involved with this child trafficking, like all of that can really be learned through learning about these, extreme abuse methods and like
Right.
orchestrated trauma, and it's like it does beg that question. Is that deliberate? Are they purposely not taught it so these cult members can just get away with it? And so the victim can just be gaslit, never get any help. Like I personally believe that, and I know I'm not alone, but it is terrifying to think that, and again, like I know people like to say bad things about authorities, but hello, you guys, like we need the authorities to like for this to be part of what they do. Like we can't just let that system exist without them helping us, like
Right.
it's not working that way. Like, but we need
Right.
like there's nobody else that can help us except authorities. Like they're the ones that can if we do have this system, and so like we need them to be educated on this. And the fact that like there are a lot of good people in there that like probably would fight. Like if they knew that this was happening, all the good people in these organizations be like, wait, what the hell? Like, are you
Mm-hmm.
kidding? Like, this exists. And like, they would be on it to like go do their job and actually protect people. And I think that's what
Agreed.
I'm afraid of is that there would be a rising up in authority if people were educated, the good ones, that
Mm-hmm.
they would rise up and be like, okay, screw this. Like, we're going to take care of this. Like, where are these people at? But instead, like, they don't tell them. And so the police and authorities don't, A, don't know about it. So when they hear about it, they don't think it exists. And then B, their focus is on sort of like, and I hate like tiering crimes, it's all terrible, but like a lower level crime of like maybe one person involved, that's kind of like what they're taught. They're not taught how child trafficking is very similar to like a mafia, that it's like an underground cartel that just exists in society and we don't know it, but instead of drugs, like the commodity is children, like there would be an uprising, I think, in authority if they knew. And it's really sad that, you were treated that way. And like that could have been really like your family could have done something really, really bad to you, as far as like retaliation. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
they still will. Like who we don't know, but like that is so horrible that like that's their protocol of like, okay, well, we do have this information. Let's just call somebody in the same family that like abused her, like
Mm-hmm.
come on, you guys, like we really have to figure this out and like do better, and that's really, really sad. Have you had any type of retaliation anyway from them? I know you said it's sort of been radio silence, but was there anything initially or even whenever you first asked them? Or have they kind of just like shut it up and not said anything to you at all?
They've more so shut me up. My older sister, particularly, just calls me batshit crazy. My mom basically implies that I'm delusional. Um, yeah.
Terrible.
And retaliation, I think right now the retaliation is the silence, or if that even isn't retaliation, it's a blessing. It's unfortunate. I wish I was crazy and making this up. I wish I was delusional and my family came after me and they were true and that what they were saying was right, because then all these kids wouldn't be hurt. But that's not the case. And their silence speaks volume and it hurts me because it just validates things even more.
100%.
And also, I do believe my older sister, I made the mistake of Googling myself once. Never again will I Google myself after bringing such a controversial issue to the public. But I do believe my older sister is out there, like typing up dialogues, other people as well. But I think that knowing my sister, she would do something like that, like talking on forums. I think that she's out there trying to discredit me. I could be wrong, but I think so.
Terrible. Yeah, it's like online sort of becomes like a new battlefield. Not all retaliation now for people is personal, right in their personal life or in their home. They know that a lot of whistleblowers do go online, and so they create like smear campaigns, behind a keyboard and anonymous
Mhm.
accounts, and like flood somebody's feed with it. Or like you said, going on people who are talking about you, if somebody writes something nice or shares your content and then Googling you and finding everybody who's posting about you and just, trying to discredit you. That's really terrible. For you, did you have the idea or when did you make the decision, hey, I am going to speak out publicly about this? Was that something that happened in a moment or was that something that you had planned to do? What was your journey with going public with all of this?
So as a child, I wanted to escape, but once I realized, yeah, it was kind of hard to escape. How am I going to get out of here? Eventually my dream became I'm going to get older, going to become an artist, I'm going to share my story. Like I wanted to tell on my mom. And so when I started recovery in 2018, I started painting then. I didn't paint before then. I actually started in the beginning of 2019 and I shared my story with art. A lot of my posts while going through this are about my story, but in a more general way. And of course, using art. Like these are my emotions, these are my flashbacks. This is me processing all the trauma. And I knew I wanted to speak up. That's why one reason why I went with the name Kibbi Linga right away. I also created that name when I was a child for me to escape the family. So there was meaning behind that too. But I knew I wanted a pseudonym for my protection to speak up as well. So I knew I wanted to do it. I even tried right away when I first started recovering, but I didn't have the strength. And so it took about 5 years of processing, of extensive work in the 12-step programs, in therapy, creating art therapy, and sharing my story with art. And then I finally gained the strength to do it myself.
I think it's so inspirational. And I love that you do your work in such a gentle way where you make really definitive and defined points, but you're able to do it in a way that when you watch your content, it almost feels like you're in a classroom. It's not sitting heavy on the person listening necessarily. You have a really beautiful way of articulating something almost in an artistic way where it's engaging and it's something I think palatable for people who might normally pass on something like that that would come up in their feed. And so one of the things that you speak up a lot about is DID, which is dissociative identity disorder, if somebody's new to that term. And I wanted to give you a little bit of space to talk about that because that's also a big part of your journey and to see when did you discover that you had that and what's kind of been your journey with dissociative identity disorder.
So for me, growing up, I did not experience the abuse that so many of my survivor friends have, in which, like, I hear so many stories of like, you're Patricia during this type of abuse, you're Melanie when I want you to go do this crime and all that. Like, I was never told I'm different people for different types of abuse. So I wasn't programmed that way, but the way I was programmed was I would ask my mom, like, how am I going to live a normal life, have kids, this beautiful life that I wanted to have, and after all this pain? And she told me that what she does is because, she told me she experienced it too. She's like, what I do is I sell my soul to the devil. So whenever I have so much pain in life, I just give my soul to the devil and he gives me a new one. And then I start over. I have no pain and I keep living. What she didn't tell me was that I was going to become more disconnected from myself when I would do that, which is what happened. I would disassociate from my true self more and I would become a personality that was different from my own. And so what ended up happening was I'm too smart to give my soul to the devil. So okay, she's telling me like just sell your soul to the devil when it gets too high. And that was like around age 10. And at around age 13, my pain is so big, so high, and I thought like of this point system with the devil because I didn't know if he was real or not, but just to be safe, like I didn't want to sell my soul. So I was like, in my head, just basic dialogue. I'm like, hey, devil, I'll give you 3 points for what I want. And the first thing was to not get my menstruation or to have an easy time with that. Because when I was 13, like I said, my mom was shaming me so much for becoming a woman because she was such a petty. And so when that happened, I talked to the devil in my head. And I'm like, hey, I'm going through this menstruation. Can you please make this easy on me? I'll give you 3 points out of the 12. Once you have all 12 points, then you can have my soul, but not until then. So actually, from age 15 to 30 or 13 to 30, I barely got my period, like at all. And when I started recovery, I got my period right away, fast and normally. However, I was also a compulsive runner during the time that so there may be a scientific role, but like not the whole time. I would get injured sometimes and have to take off 6 months maybe. I didn't. So as the years went on, like my period was just got it from age 25 to 30. I don't think I got it. And so, and then also when I was 13, that's when I was like, okay, my pain's too much, right? I just went through my menstruation. I'm already feeling guilty. It's a huge age, I think, in life, 13. And I'm like, I'm going to go from Kibbi to Paige. I premeditated the name. I knew it was coming. I had the idea from my mom. I was just waiting for the switch. I picked the name because my younger sister played volleyball with a girl named Paige, and I loved her attitude towards life. So I wanted to just switch my heart, switch kind of my persona, like try new things. I just wanted a fresh start. So I went to the devil again and I'm like, hey, I'll give you 3 more points to go from Kibby to Paige. And then at age 13, he had 12, or I'm sorry, 6 out of the 12 points. And I went from Kibby to Paige at 13, and I was Paige from 13 to 24. So for me, I switched personalities while developing DID at age 13 and 24. At age 24, I was again in too much pain, so much pain. I was on the West Coast. My mom actually came out to visit me, and I remember going out to this vegan restaurant with somebody that I was friends with from the sober living I lived at. And like, I remember feeling so embarrassed and shameful about my mom, and I couldn't figure it out. Like, I mean, to the sky and back. Like, that's how much shame, embarrassment, and guilt. And I couldn't figure it out, and I couldn't handle the pain. And like that, I'm like, I need to switch. And I picked the name Tuna because I was in a vegetarian restaurant and I wanted to be defiant. So I didn't want something vegetarian and I wanted something like low quality. So I thought of tuna because I felt like garbage, just what was going on in my head. And so from 24, I switched personalities again. And actually, because I love colors so much, Kibby was green, Paige was purple, and Tuna was orange because I give people, including myself, color based off of their personality once I get to know them enough. So, in all reality, these switches just disassociated me from my true self more and more with each one. But then once I started recovery, like a year in, these personas came on like uncontrollably because in essence I thought I was on my third life within the same life, because the first switch I figured I was doing an internal reset, like I was taking my heart and getting a new one. And then the second switch, so when I started recovery I thought I was on my third life but within the same life. And so that was a state of confusion, which is what a disorder is, a state of confusion. So it took me about almost 3 years to face that state of confusion and to come out of it and to realize that I'm one person, not three, and that those three separate lives or people or personas were to help protect me because it was too much pain to accept the truth. It was too much pain to understand it. It was too much shame. It was too much of every bad feeling. But eventually, after I embraced them, it took about 3 years, I started to integrate. And I did that actually. One big resource was social media. Um, and when I started to integrate, that was actually the most painful process, just my experience. Like the first 6 months, I was like, whoa, this is really hard to take on as one person. Like, where are my coping? Where are my other personas? But they were ready to integrate into me. So I couldn't switch, even if I tried once I started integrating. And I had to push it out and not push it out, but like, wait and just go through the pain of like adjusting to accepting my life, accepting the truth, accepting all of my pain and feelings as one person, not three. But eventually it worked. It happened. And I take responsibility and ownership for being one person today. I take on all my pain and my feelings. I take on my life as one person today, not three.
What were some of the things that you did on your healing journey that were really helpful? I know you've mentioned therapy. I'm sure your art, like you said, was like just an extremely healing way to self-express what was inside and to get it out. Were there other things that you tried that either worked or didn't?
I'd say my main healing pillars were art therapy, 12 steps, and God, or my faith. Um, yeah, I don't think I could have overcome my state of confusion with DID without my faith. Without faith, I will say, as I progress in my recovery, I have found recovery from scripture. I am very triggered by religion, um, and even the Bible, some parts of it, but that has been another healing source for me because I have a lot of Christian friends that accept me for me, and they will share like very powerful passages that help me live, that give me a blueprint to live because my cycle parents didn't teach me how to do that. So that has become an element to my recovery as well, which I think is good too with the religious abuse, that I can find value from scripture.
Absolutely. Even if it's just for healing purposes, even if it's not something that you take into your belief system, because there are a lot of people out there and it's hard to avoid, scrolling even through social media and not coming across that. So being able to at least contend with the trigger and heal it, and then find beauty in something that was really painful. It takes a lot of strength to do that. And I think that's awesome that you have kind of embraced that instead of just totally pushing it away. As far as healing goes, I know you also mentioned social media has been a huge outlet for you. Can you talk a little bit about that journey? I know in the beginning you were posting actual physical photos of your art with sort of your journey under it and the inspiration behind it. And it's since evolved and grown tremendously. You have incredible followings. You have an amazing support system in your community, and I did a podcast with you, and your community was extremely supportive and just had the most beautiful comments, to me. So I can tell that you've just done an incredible job fostering this message that for so long you've wanted to come forth ever since you were a child to, create an impact with. So talk about this journey going on social media and sort of what your message has evolved into, Where has this kind of led your passion in speaking out? And like, what are some of the things that you are talking about?
Um, my sole purpose is to heal. Like maybe I'm just a girl that likes to get heard. I don't know. But when I talk about things, I heal. And when I talk about it in real life, I heal so much. When I bring it to a public level, I heal even more. That is my main reason for being on social media. It is turning into content creation and more than just that, but I'm healing. Like I have a podcast episode coming out where I just air my dirty laundry. I'm saying my self-destructive behaviors that kept me in denial and is shameful. And people can call me crazy or make fun of me all they want, but I'm over here healing. So for me, it's just, I don't know what it is. And it's free too. But when I go on there and I share the truth, I heal. And it bring like if it's something I want to do also, right? Because I've said I wanted to share my story. So it's also something I want to do. But it's like when I follow my true self, right? Like I'm following what I want to do. And then I depend on my higher power, who I choose to call God. Um, and I do it like, imperfectly, but prioritizing faith, like, and then I speak the truth and I'm my true self, like the people that I want in my life, in addition to me healing, come and find me. And I meet beautiful souls that I dreamt of as a child. When I was a child, I thought my family was the only family in the world who did this. And I dreamt of having friends as an adult that I could relate to. And although it's so unfortunate meeting other survivors or advocates or whatever, it's also like it makes my inner child so happy because it's beyond my wildest dreams. Like I dreamt of a friend or two as a child. So when I share about this, also when I'm getting to my story of SRA, I'm meeting a lot of survivors. They're reaching out to me. So it's like been nothing but beneficial and healing for me.
What would you like society to know about satanic ritual abuse, aka, or I should say, and or just ritual abuse?
um that Google, not to look at Google. I strongly encourage people to look at testimonies, look at your podcast. I think Google is the worst place to look for information about satanic ritual abuse, and it upsets me.
100%. I agree. And unfortunately, that's like the way that people do. Like people, for whatever reason, it's been like pulling teeth for the last 4 years of my life, trying to get people to listen to a testimony. And they're like, no, that's not what I learned on TV, or that's not what I learned in this book that I read. And I'm like, okay, well, did the person that wrote the book or the article or on TV, like, did they go through it? And they're like, no, but they're an expert in it. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, why? It's like trying to learn business from somebody who's never started a business or doesn't even know how to. Like, you wouldn't go hire that person. You'd go hire somebody that has run a business before if you wanted to learn about it, you know? And it's so weird how people don't think that way when it comes to learning about abuse. Like, people are listening to third parties, you know, that sort of gatekeep,
Mm-hmm.
whether intentional or not, they gatekeep society from seeking somebody like you who's been through it, you know, and it's like the only sector of society I feel that people don't do that with. And they're looking, you know, like I said, if you are going to take a business course, like it's usually from somebody who started a business, you know, and with like, if you're getting a yoga certification, like it's from somebody that knows yoga. Like, could you imagine getting certified in, you know, yoga or something like that from like somebody who's never done it? Like, that's just weird. So I
Mm.
completely agree with you. And that's been like such a big part of my own passion is being like, go to the source, you know, you do it for everything else. Like,
Mm-hmm.
go listen to survivors, you know, and it's awesome that you're now adding your testimony out there and you're sharing and on a bunch of platforms too about, you know, this. And so I want you to talk a little bit about that too. You're on a few different platforms. And they're all a little bit different, just because of the way that they're set up, whether it's YouTube, um, TikTok, you have a whole vibe on there of what you're doing. Instagram is sort of like the TikTok, but you also have a separate community there. Can you talk a little bit about the communities that you built, what platforms you're on, and kind of like about this mission that you're doing on social media?
Yeah, I'm on TikTok. Very lovely community. Um, Instagram, very similar to TikTok, although I get to engage in a different way with the stories. I don't really use that as much on TikTok. And then I have a podcast, and my podcast is like kind of just sharing my story. It's like if someone wants to get to know me better, it's not like I'm on the podcast talking about the rituals, blaming the finger. I'm on the podcast sharing my story, what happened, what it was like, and what it's like now.
And it's awesome. You guys should go watch this. Her episodes are really palatable too. I know on this podcast, the episodes are longer. It's more of a long format. And maybe Kibby will end up having videos like that sometimes, but she tries to make everything very clear and concise for you guys and digestible. Most of her videos are about a half hour long or a little bit longer. And then I had an interview that I did with her recently, which was amazing, that I would love if you guys went and supported too. But I would love if you guys went and followed her podcast. This is a really big step for a survivor to, then not only start speaking out, but now educate people, and sort of take on an educator or leadership role in the community with dispersing this information in ways that can be really helpful for people who are either healing or curious about, well, what do I need to know about this or what is this, so it's awesome that you're doing this. And it's Kibbi Linga. Her podcast on YouTube, and I'm assuming it'll be the same on Rumble, is She Got Away podcast. But what I've noticed with Kibbi, I haven't seen anybody else with her name. So really, if you type her name in any of these platforms, her name pretty much comes right up, just with Kibbi Linga. So I'll have all of her links in the show notes for you guys. But I'd love if you guys went and supported her. Another thing that I wanted to touch on is you are also an artist, and I know that that's come up a lot, but you have your own business with this too, which is incredible. Again, you're doing a million things that most people don't ever do one in their lifetime, and you're here juggling all these different products, but you actually have kind of a separate business aside from your whistleblowing platforms of sharing videos of abuse and things like that, or education, and you have a whole website about your art. So I'd love for you to talk about the art side of Kibbi Linga and how people can support you.
Sure. Yeah, I used a lot of art throughout my healing journey.
You're so
Kind
cute.
of that's when I remembered the emotion of happy, because when I was in denial, I repressed all my emotions. I forgot what a feeling was. So that one is actually when I remembered what happiness feels like. But so yeah, I do have a business and I sell stuff online. Different types of merchandise. The pillows are the most popular, and the prints. And I am adding more to it. I also sell some originals, but through email, and there's a lot I'm not willing to let go of because I'm too emotionally attached. So,
This is so neat. And your artwork really is unique. And hearing the story behind it and how the colors means very specific things. And you can sort of see that there's color patterns in your art, or rather shades that really complement each other. It's not random at all. It's very, like these are very orchestrated with like a specific message, and it's interesting to see these because when you consider your childhood and sort of where these memories come from, and emotions that you have and the way that you processed as a kid with colors, how you manage relationships with people with colors, and also as you were saying as a child, living in the world and having a lot of your experiences just being alive as a child, being under psychedelic drugs and having to cope with your emotions and with life under a different or within a different consciousness context, so it's really neat what you've done. And I think these pieces are just so cool that you do. And I absolutely love them. Do you sort of What's your process whenever you do art? Do you have an emotion in a moment that you're going into, or do you kind of have a list of like, these are the things that I want to express, and I'm gonna pick happy today, and I'm gonna just paint what that means to me. What's your process with your art and how you create these?
I actually got the process from my inner child, my creative inner child. Like when I would have my feelings, I would compartmentalize, and I was talking about this earlier, like different emotions with different colors, different people with different colors. Like my dad was orange, so when I worked on my paintings with him, there was a lot of orange in them. Processing that relationship, forgiving him. I'm green, so that's my heart right there. Um, so when I was a kid, it would help me to have my emotions by like I don't know, assigning the different feelings and people to colors, and then I would create an image in my head. And that is what I'm doing when I am painting. I think of a feeling, and then, like, let's say the feeling is, um, trying
What
to
about
think of
what
one,
about this
like
one?
happy.
Happy.
Here we go, happy. Um, I was remembering the feeling of happy. So yellow is my color for happy, always has been. And then in the middle, it starts off as dark and then it gets lighter and lighter because white is my color for hope. And so on the outside, as you can see, it gets whiter for hope because, like, I was brainwashed for so many years. And so for my years during denial, I didn't get to experience authentic happiness. And so I found it like hard at first to regain the experience of experiencing authentic happiness. But the more I experience it, the easier it gets. And so the center part where it's like I don't know, a maze that I'm trying to get out of. It's kind of like I'm trying to get out of the maze of the brainwashing that I was put in order to become happy. And that's why it goes from dark and then gets lighter on the outside, is because it gets better the more I experience it, I guess. Like I get to experience happiness more the more I allow myself to, even though it's hard at first, or it was hard for me at first at the time.
That's so neat. And I love that in this photo you wore yellow and then the background, maybe it wasn't intentional, but it's kind of like a tan shade of like a yellow hue. So I love how like the whole vibe of this moment for you, like you just look genuinely happy even in this photo. It's really cute. But I always love hearing the processes too, because somebody could look at this and be like, oh, that looks kind of random, or a sort of a something that random, I guess, that you just kind of like put some things together, but there's actually like a really cool message behind all of these pieces, which I love. And I kind of skimmed through the website, and some of you might be listening on Spotify or iTunes, but they all have names too. She's named all of her pieces. So if you guys have, empty space on your walls somewhere, or if you have a friend or somebody that you love that has some empty space that they're looking to fill, you guys can scroll through the names of these and sort of see what kind of vibe that either you want in your home or that you want to give somebody, and you can tell them what it's called and kind of let them interpret that message. But I think this is so cool. I love that you have a business. I think it's so neat that a lot of people that didn't go through the trauma that you have never started a business, have never spoken out about hard things online. You have all these obstacles against you. You're healing. You're busy with all this for another thing. But you have just a lot that you have to deal with personally every day, and I think it's really cool that you're so brave and courageous that you're starting businesses and doing, what even like some of the strongest people that I've ever met in my life like would never contend with doing. It's so cool. So people can purchase, this is the main spot where they can purchase art from you or get originals is from your website, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Or originals through email.
Gotcha. Okay. And that's kibbilinga.com. So you guys can go there. On YouTube, it is She Got Away podcast, or you can type in Kibbi Linga and it will come up. Her name on her social media platforms, whether it's Instagram or Twitter or TikTok. She's very, very active on TikTok. She has incredible videos, but I encourage you guys to go follow her on every platform. is Kibbi Linga. So you guys can type in her name there and follow her, share her videos. I downloaded before I got to meet her, the video somebody had sent me or tagged me in on here. Got an amazing response whenever I posted it on Twitter. It was just a really incredible, like 60 minutes or excuse me, 60 seconds or less video. Um, I think it's really helpful. A lot of you ask what you can do, and one of the biggest things is sharing content and following these creators and whistleblowers who don't have the protection of our authorities. Like we have to sort of step it up and protect them, But one of the things that you can do is go download these videos. It's really easy on your phone. Go download it, 60 seconds or less a lot of times, or just a little bit longer. Go post it on your social media and educate people. She does a great job breaking down little topics or a big topic in a very short amount of time. It's an excellent way to sort of open up somebody's eyes or get them curious to maybe listen to a full testimony, And she has a very grounded and down to earth way that she presents this information. So very, very easy way that you guys can support a survivor. You guys can go purchase her art. Again, it's so fun. I think, I would love if Kibbi could just be resourced from us and have us create a really successful business for her so she can buy the equipment that she needs to podcast. She can have the time afforded to be a whistleblower and educator, and we have the power to do that if we put our funds and help resource survivors, instead of buying that coffee or, giving it to maybe a nonprofit where you don't know where the money goes at the end of the day. It's a really awesome way that you can give directly to a survivor is by going to their website and actually purchasing something from them that they're creating themselves and where where your funds go. So I really encourage you guys to go follow her, support her, buy her art for yourself or give it to a friend or loved one, and help share her messages. She's working really hard on this, you guys. It's a lot of time and effort to like even just make a little TikTok video. It can take a lot of time. So it's cool if you guys can go help share all of this and, recommend her pages to people and just support her. And Kibbi, was there anything that you had that we didn't get to talk about yet today that you wanted to talk about?
No, I can't think of anything.
You did so awesome. Thank you for coming on and sharing. I know that the video part of like long format and just doing podcasts is something that you're venturing into, and it's not something that you've done that long, but nobody would ever know that. Like you're such a pro at being able to talk about this and you did absolutely phenomenal today. So thank you with all my heart for your vulnerability, for sharing, for spending all this time with us. And for all that you do for the community. I speak for myself, for my community and yours. Thank you for the time and effort and energy that you put into doing all of this for us, knowing that you're going to have negativity in your comments, knowing that, you could have family members that aren't happy with you. And just, knowing that there's unknowns with it too, of, different ways that people can twist information or just, bully. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything that you're doing because I know how much time it must be and energy. And we all really appreciate you. We have so much to learn from you.
Thank you. And thank you too. Like I am very inspired by the community that you've built since our interview and actually that TikTok or that Twitter video that you're talking about. I saw that retweet before I met you and
That's
it's
funny.
funny how that works out. It's like, oh, I see this person posting this and then I meet you later and I am so inspired by your community and I thank you for the community that you've built and your community. It inspires me and makes my inner child happy.
Oh, well, your inner child and little Kibby are both so proud of you. We're all really proud of you. You made that little girl proud. She wished that she was where you're at right now, and she's just beaming knowing that you followed through with that promise for her. So that's so beautiful that you can, reflect on that and what a big part of your message that is. So you guys, I really, again, go support Kibby. I'll have all of her links in the show notes. So no matter what platform you're on, it just lights up as a hyperlink. You don't even have to go to the actual social media site. Just go in the show notes. It'll be listed there. Just click and it'll divert you directly to her social media. So go support her. I'll have the same on my information. So if you guys want to connect with me, I'll have all my information as well lit up as a hyperlink in the show notes and would love your support on all different platforms too. But please share. That's like the one thing that I ask of you guys. If you find value in this, I'm not out here trying to nickel and dime you guys for anything. Like everything I do is free. So the one thing that I can ask for you guys is if you guys find value, just go share it with one person, just share it or put it on your social media. Super helpful. This type of material doesn't really get elevated too easily. So any way that you guys can help means so much to us. But you guys, thank you so much for tuning in. God bless you, and we will see you next time.